The legend of Fisher's ghost, returning from the grave to accuse his murderer, is well known in New South Wales. There is even a Fisher's Ghost Festival held in November in Campbelltown since 1956 to remember the story. A far less famous case also involved the ghost of the victim returning to plead silently for justice. Alexander Rickson arrived in Maryborough, Queensland, from Kent on a ship called the Star Queen, accompanied by a woman he claimed to be his wife, who had been living with him for 3 or 4 months in Kent. The woman, Lydia Quips, was not, however, married to Rickson, although they lived together until March 1876. A dispute arose between the two over a child of Lydia's, whom Rickson wanted her to part with, because it was not his child. He himself had a daughter of about 9 or 10, and another child aged 4. Lydia refused, so the two separated after an argument on the 3rd of March. Rickson consoled himself by marrying a woman named Anne Jobson Bush on the 4th of March. Anne, a native of Surrey, was 26 and had been in Queensland for just 9 months, working as a servant. She was described as delicate, being small and thin. To say the least, the hasty marriage was a failure. The couple spent 1 night together in their brief marriage. Rickson spent most of the remainder of the time visiting Lydia Quips, who lodged nearby with a couple named Adamson, who had also arrived on the same ship with her and Rickson the previous year. Rickson spent most of the 14th of March in the company of Lydia and stayed with her until 6 a.m. the next morning when he left, promising to go and dig up some sweet potatoes from his garden for her. Rickson went home, and neighbours heard the couple arguing, and Rickson shouting at his wife in a loud and angry voice that, "I will make you care," before it suddenly went quiet. About 8 a.m. he went back to Lydia's with the vegetables, and as he emptied them out of a bag he told her, "I have been and done for my wife." Quips replied, "Good God, I will never speak to you again as long as my name is Lydia." Rickson put his hand on her throat and dug his nails in, saying, "I did it this way." Then he said, "So help me God, I have not done it," and left. Soon after, his little girl ran in to tell Lydia that Anne Rickson was dead. Rickson himself went around 10 a.m. to the neighbour, Mrs. Daniel Kinane, who had overheard him earlier, and tearfully remarked, "I think my old woman is dying." The neighbour went to the house and found Anne Rickson cold and dead. Her husband said that she had suffered stomach pains all night, and that he had twice given her brandy to drink. Another neighbour, Ellen Griffin, was called in by Rickson's daughter about 10:15 a.m. and found Dan Kinane there, who said Anne was having a fit. She saw the body with its mouth partly open and the face covered in flies. There was no froth on Annie's lips, she noted. She felt for a pulse and found none. "My God, the woman is dead," she stated, and urged Rickson to go for a doctor. Instead, he was sitting on the bed and complaining that he had rheumatism in his knees. Mrs. Griffin repeated that he go for a doctor. "I have rheumatism in my thigh. I cannot go," he pleaded. "Oh dear me, do go, and don't let the woman lie dead like that," Mrs. Griffin insisted. After an interval, Rickson went to fetch Dr. Joseph Little. The observant Ellen Griffin thought that the body looked like it had been placed on the bed, one arm by her side, the other across her body. The bed, she noticed, had been made. She asked the daughter what had happened, and she answered that her father had helped her mother onto the bed and that he was crying. Her mother complained of being ill. The group were joined by another neighbour, Mrs. Reeve, who noticed the marks of fingernails on the dead woman's windpipe. She asked Dr. Little about the scratches on the throat, and he suggested that they may have been caused by a brooch pin. Mrs. Griffin doubted that, and also added that she had been married for 21 years and had considerable experience in washing and laying out the dead, and judged that Annie had been dead for an hour to an hour and a half before she saw the body. After Dr. Little had pronounced Annie dead, Rickson and William Adamson went to inform the police. Mrs. Griffin noted that although Rickson claimed to have rheumatism, he did not walk as though he did. In the evening, Mrs. Adamson and Lydia Quips washed the body of Annie Rickson and laid it out for burial. Despite her protest that she would not speak to him again, Lydia continued to consort with Rickson for a few days before he was arrested while in her company. She went to his house at his request to help look after his children and wash some clothes. An inquest was held at which Rickson could scarcely give his evidence through the copious tears he shed. The story he told was that his wife had been ill for 2 or 3 days. On the Sunday before she died, she complained of a pain in her head and a sore finger. After laying down for 3 hours, she felt better and cooked them a meal. He had given her brandy 2 or 3 times, as well as a cup of coffee. On Monday night, he said he was with his wife and not with Lydia Quipps, and that Annie complained of a pain in her side and in the pit of her stomach. When she awoke in the morning, she tried to make breakfast, but lacked the strength to lift the kettle from the fire and returned to bed. Alex went to dig the sweet potatoes, and when he came back inside, he found her unable to speak and laying on her back in bed, flailing her arms about. A bootmaker named Freeman, who had known Annie Rickson since September 1875, said that he had never known her to complain of ill health, other than an occasional headache. Lydia Quipps was recalled and questioned about where Rickson had spent the night. She affirmed he had spent it with her. Dr. Joseph Little, who had examined the body, gave his medical opinion that Anne Rickson died of apoplexy. Apart from some congestion of the lungs, her organs were in good health. The marks on her throat could have been self-inflicted, in the doctor's belief, and with that finding made, her body was duly buried. It was the same night that a man named Adamson claimed that as he was going home, walking across a reserve, he saw what he thought was a small black heap of earth. As he kept approaching, he noticed it move, and guessed it was a black dog. Whatever it was growing larger, and he thought it might be a drunk staggering to his feet. He walked toward the object, and started to shake, and a cold perspiration broke out all over his body, and a bag he was carrying over his shoulder fell to the ground, as he recognized the features as those of Anne Rickson. The ghost said, "I am the murdered wife of Rickson." The ghost then either placed one hand over its mouth and the other on its throat, or it took Adamson's hands and placed them there. Thereupon the wraith disappeared. Adamson lingered at the reserve in a state of confusion for some time. When he got home, he told his wife about the strange apparition, and then the next day informed the police. Whether this was William Adamson is not clear, but whoever he was, he knew Mrs. Rickson by sight. Rickson and Quipps were out walking with a young man when she and Rickson were arrested, but Lydia was soon allowed to go after she made a statement. The body was exhumed and examined once more by Dr. Little, who changed his mind and said that death was due to strangulation. At the police court on the 24th of March, Alexander Rickson was charged with the wilful murder of his wife. The trial took place on the 11th of April 1876 before Judge Lutwich. Mr. Blake QC prosecuted, but Rickson was undefended. Dr. Little said although he now favoured strangulation as the cause of death, he was still uncertain about that. The judge questioned him about violence attending instances of strangulation, and quoted a scene from Shakespeare's play, King Henry VI, describing the murder of the Duke of Gloucester. "But see, his face is black and full of blood, his eyeballs further out than when he lived, staring full ghastly like a strangled man, his hair upreared, his nostrils stretched with struggling, his hands abroad displayed as one that grasped and tugged for life, and was by strength subdued." Dr. Little said it was an excellent description of death by strangulation, and said he did not observe protruding eyeballs, a protrusion of the tongue, or frothy blood in the mouth, as he would expect in such a death. Her face was slightly livid, but that was all. The foreman of the jury asked if Annie had been drunk, could strangulation have occurred leaving little sign of violence? Dr. Little said it could, but he saw no evidence she had drunk the half-pint of brandy Rickson claimed he had given his wife. The main circumstantial evidence against him came from Lydia Quipps and the Adamsons, but it was revealed that Adamson's house was considered notoriously bad, and that he and Rickson were both living off the immoral earnings of both Mrs. Adamson and Lydia. No witnesses were called on behalf of the prisoner. Mr. Blake declined to address the jury, as the prisoner was undefended. Rickson was told that if he wished he may address the jury. He said, "Why should a man's life be sworn away by two common prostitutes? It is all false which they have said. The reason why I turned Lydia out was because she was not fit to live with. I am innocent of the death of that woman. I handed Lydia the potatoes in the back door. She was sitting on the step. No such conversation ever took place between us. When I turned her out, I said I did so because I was going to get another woman. She said she would like to see me hung. If God was to strike me dead, I never said it. If I'd have done anything, I'd have said it, so help me God. I would. Since I've been in the lock-up, I've always slept and ate and drank well, such as I got. I couldn't do that if I had this on my mind. I lived under a lawyer for 2 years and 7 months at home, and I've got a good character from him in my box. That's all I have to say." In summing up, the judge told the jury that strong suspicion was not enough. They must be sure his hands were the direct cause of her death, and there was no direct testimony to that effect. He also commented on the medical evidence, saying that Dr. Little was not convinced in his own mind as to the cause of death. After an absence of half an hour, the jury returned, and Rickson learnt his fate. He was declared not guilty and discharged. The doctor's bungled post-mortem had put enough doubt in the minds of the jury that they gave Rickson the benefit of the doubt. Although he had appeared calm during the trial, following his acquittal he broke down and sobbed on the steps of the lock-up for an hour. Did the ghost of Annie Rickson appear that night to demand retribution, and then fade back into the dark corners of history?